What's going on, boys? Quin69 here. Long time no see. If somehow you've been living under a rock and you didn't know it, Diablo 4 was announced. And I was at BlizzCon at the forefront, playing the demos, talking to the devs, watching every single interview and even interviewing people myself. And I've gotten to know a lot of stuff, all right? Now, there is a weird thing going on, which is totally abnormal for Blizzard, and the devs are actually asking for feedback from the community. So that is what I intend to do. This video is going to be a pure feedback video. Now, a lot of people might think it's coming off as me being negative towards the game or something. That's not what I'm trying to do. I'm going to talk about all the things that I'm worried about, and I'll talk about some of the things that I'm excited about, but really I need to, give the critical feedback that is required, so we don't end up with like a Diablo 3.5. Okay, that's the plan here. So let's get into it. Let's tackle the big, scary topics first. Probably my main worry when it comes to Diablo 4 is the end game, okay? The end game. Because Diablo 3 has this thing where it's amazing gameplay, amazing graphics, everything's smooth. Diablo 4 is looking like it's even better gameplay. It's got even better graphics. The aesthetic is just fucking amazing. It just looks so dark and gory. It's very much similar to Diablo 2. Okay, they've got all that, but now there's questions being asked, and the questions that are being answered, they're really scary. Let me just start off with this one here. There was an interview done with Alan Adham. He's a co-founder of Blizzard. He's like a executive producer, one of the biggest dicks at Blizzard. He was asked the question, is the Paragon system coming back? AKA the Paragon system in Diablo 3, where you effectively infinitely farm on a treadmill, like a little hamster, forever and ever and ever and ever, and you can never reach an endpoint, and you just grind power infinitely. He answered the question with, that's the hallmark of Diablo. I have close to a 600 Paragon Demon Hunter. We love the idea that people who love our games can play for hundreds, even thousands of hours for Diablo. And the Paragon system is central to that. That's really scary when you hear that, and that scares me. But I got a chance to talk to a few of the lead game designers, and they elaborated further on this. Privately, it wasn't recorded necessarily, but they were talking about saying that we want a system in place where people can basically progress. When they log in, they have a system that's not just gear and stuff like that, not just resources. Like, we want a system that allows you to progress. Now, I played Diablo 3 for we're talking 10,000 hours just on Monk, for example. And let me tell you now, the point where I stopped playing Diablo 3 like an absolute maniac was the point where they added in the infinite Paragon system. Okay, this is like Reaper Soul Season 1. It was Season 1, basically, he'd grind to 1,000, and it just diminished to the point where it was no longer worth farming. Same thing with Season 2. And then Season 3, the system came in where you could just farm to infinity. Now, I played that system. It was new. I was like, okay, so wait, you can just keep grinding? Like, it doesn't get worse? It doesn't get to a point where it's just not viable to farm anymore? Or you can just keep going, and like every day I can gain like 50 Paragon levels just as long as I play 12 hours a day? And I burnt myself out to the point that I just quit Diablo 3 for a while. And that is because of the fact that infinite in-game progression systems just don't feel satisfying. They just don't feel satisfying. You realize, you get to this point where you're grinding away and you're playing the game, and you're like, wait a minute, what am I doing? This is just this thing. I'm always going to have levels to grind, and it's never going to end. What am I going to just play Diablo 3 for like 14 hours a day, 15 hours a day until I die so I can get an arbitrarily higher number and a greater Earth keystone? Yeah, I basically did that for quite a while. But the point is, it's just you become self-aware of the fact that, oh wait, this whole it's just pointless. It's a pointless system, and it's really, it doesn't feel good. Okay, it doesn't feel good. Now, you'd ask, like, what would be a good example of a system? I much prefer. Okay, I much preferred an earlier Diablo 3 when you could basically grind to a point and it became no longer viable. You would kind of just grind to about 900 Paragon in Season 1 and 2, and at that point, it was like, that was it. You kind of like, yeah, you could sit there and you could farm all day and maybe you get +5 main stat, but it was just pointless. Or, for example, in Diablo 2, where you could effectively, get to 90, and if you really wanted to, you could just do that whole grind again and get like a very, very small power gain to go up a few levels. But the big difference was, with Diablo 2, for example, there's an endpoint. Now, this endpoint is basically hardly anyone's going to reach it. I never got a level 99 character in Diablo 2. But you can see it there, and you know that you're progressing the system. Eventually, you're going to come to an end. Just seeing those goalposts being in a fixed position, even if you're never going to reach them, it gives you a goal to aim at, and it doesn't feel like you're just like a hamster, I guess. Same thing with Path of Exile. I'm gonna reference a lot of games, guys. I'm not like saying that Diablo 4 should just be like, oh, just make your game like the other games. Not at all. I want D4 to revolutionize the space. I want D4 to come up with new concepts, new ideas that completely blow the ARPG genre up and make it like the best it's ever been, right? But in terms of Paragon systems and like infinite grinding systems, from personal experience, I can tell you now, it's trash. And ever since they implemented this infinite grinding system, I lost the will to play the game for more than a week. I was like, well, okay, I've got all my gear, and I've min-maxed everything, and I've got to this point where, okay, the only thing I can do now is grind to infinity and just arbitrarily, change my number, +1 number. Oh, look, I can do 1 GR higher now. Cool. I can do 1 GR higher now. Cool. You realize the whole thing is just pointless. Whereas if you have a fixed point, like in Path of Exile, for example, even if you're never going to hit that point, I still haven't hit 100 in PoE before. Just putting that out there. It still feels good to progress. Now, maybe it's possible to have some sort of infinite grinding system that doesn't make you feel like a hamster. And the way in which you would do that, which I've suggested that they should do in Diablo 3, is just at a certain threshold, make it a really, really high threshold. Make it so you have to be a complete neckbeard if you want to ever get there, and you have to commit to your character and play like a crap ton to reach that point. But at a certain threshold, instead of giving the players power, you give them some sort of bonus, be it gold find or magic find or just whatever. It could even just be a number which goes up just to show like the rats, like, oh look, I played this. I'm a massive neckbeard and I played this game like a hell around. Whatever. It could be even cosmetic rewards. I don't care. You just disassociate power with that, playing the game. And then instead of feeling like a hamster, you can be like, oh, I'm grinding to this point where I get maximum power, and then if I keep playing beyond that point, I get some bonus stuff, but it's not necessarily like I feel like I'm forced into grinding it forever and ever and ever and ever, and then that whole feeling goes away. I would be okay with that. You just have to make sure you do it correctly and make sure you balance it right. I mean, I'm not a game designer, but at a certain threshold, power stops, and then you just go on from there. Now, okay, that's pretty much it for the powering levels. I'm just going to stop bitching about that now. Another thing I'm worried about is the fact that they've said numerous times, I mean, this is confirmed 100%, they're going to be releasing a base game and then an expansion, that's effectively how they're going to, that's their monetization scheme. I'm a little bit worried that they're not going to have substantial patches. I don't know, I've played other games. I'm not going to name names. I played other games with other monetization schemes where they just consistently drop substantial patches, decent size one, really big one, decent size one, and it feels like there's like always something new to try out and always something new to do and some other thing. And with the expansion scheme, it worries me that they might be like just drop a fat load of content and then we just have nothing for months and months and months, and then another fat load. What I'm worried about is that they put too much into expansions and not enough into content patching. So that's just some feedback I want to give there. Another thing was world bosses. Okay. So in World of Warcraft, there's this thing called looking for raid. Yeah, it's called looking for raid. I think most people know about it. It's basically so casuals and like any little spurgling can go out and they can experience like bosses and things, and they just get, here, have free handout loot, have free handout loot. World bosses, to me, I think they're cool, and there's a cool community aspect where like, oh my god, there's this big monster, let's all go and kill it, whatever. I like that. But now what I don't want is them tying like insane loot to these world bosses. Like, yeah, they had them in the game as like a community thing, which you can, you know, you can do for fun. But don't, like, if they put all crazy loot on these world bosses, which effectively you could just turn up to, and you could just tag the boss, and then just go AFK while other people kill it. It's basically just LFR, but in Diablo. And we just don't need that. We don't need Diablo. Another thing is that it needs to have, I don't know, people could exploit the crap out of it because of the fact that there's effectively going to be multiple shards and layers, right? You can't have, like, millions of players in the one area, so they're going to split up the game into, like, you know, layers. You know, people could obviously layer hop. For example, streamers could be like, yo, invite me to the world boss server, and then you could just repeatedly do a world boss over and over again, or clan members, etc. could just do that and just exploit the crap out of loot. So they're going to have to put some sort of cooldown on how often you can receive loot from these bosses. And I think if I was to itemize it, and, like, you know, if I was to say what loot you could get from world boss, it'd probably be some sort of material or crafting material, or some sort of component in which you use to create a bigger item, which requires other components from other things, from, you know, more difficult content. That way you're not, like, just giving people free handout loot. Now, another really big point is leveling. And I'm not talking about Paragon levels, I'm talking about actual just standard levels. So in Diablo 3, they have this thing where they have like a soft max level, which is effectively level 70, where you go from 1 to 70, and then you start gaining Paragon levels. Whereas in Diablo 4, it's the exact same thing. You go from 1 to 40, and then they're going to be giving us some sort of level, right? I don't know, whatever they want to call it. Maybe they won't. You know, maybe they won't. You never know. But assuming they go down that route of having a soft cap, right? Like a 40 and then a Paragon level, which it looks like they are going to be doing. It can't be like D3, where it's like 2 hours, and everything you do between 1 to 69 is irrelevant and pointless, and you don't really develop your character or anything. It's like, it's a really shitty feeling process. It's just like it just feels almost like a tutorial. And they need to extend that leveling process and make it feel good to do. So I don't know, that's probably to do with itemization. I'll probably get into this. They need to probably fix itemization in terms of, you know, like, you need to keep some of that gear on the way, so you feel like you're going around and stuff you're picking up matters, you know, or you're collecting stuff and progressing, and you're specializing your character in such a way that it feels like you're making a lot of progression, right? And it should just be longer because, you know, variants of gameplay, like if you do X, Y, and Z at endgame, you're going to be doing something different from going to 1 to 40. More variance is always better because, you know, if you're doing more shit and different things, it's more replayable, right? I'm not a game designer. I don't know the correct amount of time it should take to level up. They'd probably have to get, like, you know, do some testing and figure out what feels good. But I can tell you now, definitely longer than 2 hours. Definitely longer than 2 hours. Now let's open up a massive can of worms and let's talk about itemization in Diablo 4. Overall, it seems like they've got the message from D3, and that is they're not just going to slap a bunch of multipliers on gear, and they're not going to just make overpowered sets which have cookie-cutter builds that, oh, we think you should play the game like this, so here you go. They're going to be adding in a bunch of, you know, legendaries and, you know, uniques or whatever, and they're going to have special modifiers on them which make you, you know, augment your skills and make you change the way you play the game, which is really good, really promising. My major and biggest concern is these stats called attack and defense, okay? Now, these stats already existed in Diablo 3. All I've done is just rename it. And these stats, it's main stat. It's generic damage increase, and it's generic damage reduction. Except it's just, I guess they thought the possibility of, you know, calling it like dexterity and strength or whatever was too complicated, so they just really, you know, I've seen this before in mobile games where they've just dumbed it right down and just called it attack and defense. And that's not what makes me mad. It's not, I'm not mad that, like, oh, no, this is a mobile game, so I'm mad. No, the reason why it tilts me is that it removes so much choice. It's just a really horrible way of itemizing gear where it's like, big number, good. Small number, bad. You know how I was talking about going from 1 to 70 in D3, and how pointless it felt because of the fact that, like, you know, you're just getting all this gear, which it's just all getting thrown away. Do you know why that is? Main stat. Literally, like, oh, look, this one starts off with like 50 decks, and then I get one that's got 200. And at the beginning of the game, that is a massive damage increase, right? It's not even close. And this whole thing where, you know, just making all gear that you found up until the point where you hit like max level or get into the end game completely obsolete. It's stupid. It's really bad. Now, I'm not saying that at level 10 you should find some item in which it's like the best item in the game and you use it forever and ever and ever. That's not good either. I'm saying I've seen other systems and other games where they have different tier rolls, where like basically, you know, based on the level in which the item drops, it's going to have a different item level, and then based on that item level, the amount it can roll will get better and better as you go. But theoretically, and, you know, often, you know, not often, well, sometimes you can get an item at a low level which happens to roll with like the perfect affixes for your build. Like, you're playing a fire guy, something drops and it's got like fire damage on it. It's got some extra mana on it. It's got some extra increased area damage on it. Whatever. It's got all these things, and they're the perfect affixes, and they rolled really like pristine, high end. And then you go on and you use that for a long time, and that, you know, that gets you into end game until you eventually do replace it with something better. But it's not like, you know, it's not like with attack and defense or main stat where, oh no, you 100% just throw that item away because this has got a small number on it, and because of this small number, it's automatically bad, and this one is automatically better. Even though, you know, the one that's like literally like, you know, level 70 or whatever and has the crazy amount of attack and defense on it has got trash affixes. It doesn't matter. Just the raw amount of damage multiplication from that main stat just invalidates everything else before it, which is, it's just really bad. And on top of that, people aren't, like, gamers, mobile gamers, console gamers, you know, we're like, I don't think Diablo 4 is aimed at, like, 7-year-olds or 6-year-olds. It doesn't need to be a system of, like, big number good, small number bad. You can start getting into, you know, slightly more complicated things and more flavorful, you know, ways of, you know, displaying your stats and affixes and things. You don't need to dumb it down that much. But yeah, I'm not going to go on about it. I honestly, if it was me, I would just straight up remove the main stat system. I think it's a bad. I think it's flawed. And I think it's a system that's designed for, I don't know who. Maybe it's designed for like 7-year-olds. But it's just overall, I think it's bad for the game, and it reduces the replayability of the game. And yeah, I'm gonna stop. So now let's talk about magic items and rare items. So there was an interview done by Riker, and he was interviewing David Kim, one of the lead game designers of D4. And it was a really good interview, and David Kim's the man. But the question was something along the lines of, are you going to make rare items viable? You know, like, are you going to make yellow items viable, you know, in D4? Because in D3 and in, you know, they're completely just, you just instantly salvage them. There's no situation where you use them. This is a complete waste of time. You just salvage them for mats, and you would never consider equipping it to your character. He responded, this is kind of monk ass. If players feel like they have too much choice, then they could consider making rare items viable. And it's the complete opposite. It's literally the complete opposite. We don't think we have too much choice. We want more choice. We want more choice. The whole thing is, rare items are effectively, should be, in my opinion, like a custom item that you can customize and fill in holes. So you've got a build which, you know, needs a particular res, or it's not got very much HP, and you need to like have cooldown reduction of this item. So basically a custom item which you can create to fill a niche. And rare items can have tons of shit on them. They can have things on them which you just don't even need, or like you would think that are just completely, you know, like whatever, be it like just a completely dead stat, or which something you might think is a dead stat. The fact is, some spurg out there, like me or someone out, is going to figure out like, oh, I'm making a build where I'm stacking movement speed at every single slot. And, you know, having a rare item which has, you know, there's no unique, which has movement speed on it, I'm going to get a rare item which has, you know, cooldown reduction and movement speed with some HP and maybe some attack speed, whatever. And he's going to equip that item, and he's going to fill that niche, right? He's got another choice, like, oh, no uniques fit the parameter for what I want to have for this slot, then I'm going to get me a custom rare, and I'm going to put it in there. Magic items are the same thing. In D2, I've been told repeatedly in D2, rare items are really cool. I mean, yeah, they were really cool. These magic items are really cool. And that's because of the fact that they had very limited affixes on them, but they could have like plus to skills on them, and they would have like a bigger role than any other piece. So like, for whatever reason, if you're making some autistic build where, I don't know, you wanted to have the most overpowered version of some buff or you know, anything like that, you could effectively sacrifice a bunch of affixes and just plus the crap out of that one skill. Now, most people aren't going to use them. Most people aren't going to use magic and rares. And I would say, in terms of distribution, in terms of how people should use gear, I would totally agree that it should be like magic are used the least, you know, rare the next least, and then, you know, legendary from there. And you know, you could have it like that. That way it's easier to determine if an item's going to be bad or good when you see it on the ground. But sometimes, in niche cases, I think that you should be able to equip a magic item and it be viable. Sometimes in niche cases, you can put a rare item on him and it could fill in the exact slot that you're trying to fill. Doing things that are, you know, unique to what legendaries can do, for example. Which is like this whole thing where we don't think that it's like, you know, too much choice or something. We want more choice. I feel like it's almost impossible to give too much choice. Maybe too much choice it could only apply as if you had a bunch of items that all did the same thing or very similar things. And then that would be like pointless complexity, which just makes the game more confusing. But if everything did something different and unique, and, you know, you had like a different way of doing, you know, using items, and you had like, you know, items that would be useless in most builds, but sometimes good for some weird, quirky shit, then that's good. And I feel like it's almost impossible to give us too much choice. So don't worry about that. Speaking of item rarity, they've already said there's going to be magic, rare, legendary, ancient, and mythic. And they keep reiterating the fact that they're going to not make rare items just drop more frequently the higher you go. They're going to have more powerful versions of the same item. And they didn't go into the real specifics of that. Like, does that mean as you go into really, really high, you know, keystones or whatever you want to call them, GRs, they're just going to keep adding like +1, +2, +3. Like, oh, look, I got this ancient item +5 because I did like a GR 25, you know, keystone. Which is really scary because the second you do that, you effectively almost invalidate all the gear up until that point. Which is bad, right? It's not good. They need to decide on a threshold, right? And where the maximum tier rolls drop, and then beyond that, people can push it if they want to for leaderboards. You know, they can push it if they want to for, you know, whatever kind of leveling system they have. But you don't want to make items and gear scale infinitely, because then it's just not going to be a very rewarding system when it comes to itemization. I'm hoping that it's just going to be, you know, to be honest, I prefer if there was no ancient items. I prefer if it was just like magic, rare, legendaries. I'm okay with mythics, because mythics, they're doing some sort of special thing where you can only have like one mythic equipped or something. So it's like a weird sort of, you know, you get to pick whatever mythic item you're going to use for that build. Seems like it could be a little bit of fun. So I'm not opposed to mythic. But the whole like Titanforge or ancient or whatever the hell that is, no. And infinite scaling for items, no. Definitely just pick a threshold, like probably a point in which the game has you know, it's difficult and challenging, but it's not unfun where you have to sit there and like fight a monster for 20 minutes to kill it, sort of thing. You know, forcing people to push to the absolute, you know, highest point the character's capable of going 24/7, because that's not going to be super fun. Now I'm going to chuck in a couple bonus things, like specific boss drops. I think that they're really awesome when you can basically summon a boss, like a really, really difficult boss, via committing a lot of resources and time, and then you can kill that boss, and you know that boss has a chance of dropping an item that most players in the game would want, that's really, really good and really, really strong. I really think it's an awesome system, and it's not on D3, so I thought I'd mention it. It'd be cool if we could see that in D4. Charms from D2. Okay, yeah, the whole thing where you have to choose between inventory space and or power, that was pretty AIDS. Diablo 4 already has a utility bag. Okay, hear me out. A charm bag. Or just added it, just like, make players choose between health potion and charms. Health potion, it's a good idea, trust me. Now let's go into a really spicy topic, and that is trading. So, the D4 brothers have said that there's going to be items that can be free trade, like crafting mats, certain like common items, etc. They're going to have items that are like rarer and usable, like gear that you can equip, that could be traded one time, and then it binds on trade. And then there'll be a third classification, which would be like, no, you just can't trade it. And that'd be for like really, really, really powerful items. See, I really like the idea of free trade, and the idea of trading once and then it binds. I'm okay with that as well. I'm okay with that. Like, I'm okay to to make compromises, but not being able to trade items at all, especially powerful ones. I think it's bad. I think it's bad. And hear me out. Hear me out. How are you going to get excited when a really, really, really good item drops a second time and you can't trade it? How are you going to get excited about it? That's going to feel awful. It's going to be like, God damn it, I just got the item and I can't even trade it. It's just like, it's just a complete waste. Are you kidding me, man? It's not going to feel good. It's not going to feel good at all. And obviously this, the second you allow people to trade items and everything all the time, it also means that people are open to like selling it for real money, and there's like, people who are like just basically buying stuff and selling it higher and inflating the market and all that. So you open up a big can of worms. But overall, I think the benefits, like this is one huge benefit right here. What if you don't like killing bosses, right? What if your favorite end game is like going around and grinding goats in some field, which drops some crafting mat, which everyone needs, but no one else wants to do that. But you for whatever reason, you're autistic and you just love killing goats. And you just go out and you farm that goat fur, and then you trade your goat fur, that you've for like 10 hours you've been farming, and you can trade it for an item that you could use to make your character more powerful. Like, that's, why does Blizzard want to force players to play? Like, can't people just do what they want? And of course, most people are just going to go out and kill stuff and get their own gear. Some people are going to trade, and then why force the players into a certain playstyle? Just let them trade. Now, they could be doing it purely to stop people doing RMT and stuff like that. But I feel like that's a kind of a if that is the reason, it's kind of a bad reason. You could just police it better, right? Just police it better, forehead. I have no idea how to do that. I guess you have to like go and like sue the companies that are trying to sell money for trying to sell items in game for real life money and stuff. But like just do it and then make the best version of the game that you can make. To segue from that, crafting. So they said that there's going to be crafting, and it's going to be a lot more. They're going to have a lot more depth than Diablo 3. But the central focus is you going to be going out there and killing stuff, and killing demons or whatever, and then crafting items. So it's presumably like, no, there's going to be soulbound materials which you are forced to go out and get if you want to craft gear. Why? Why not just make them? Why not unbind them? Let them be traded. Let crafting people who are really good at crafting and knowing what people want and being able to identify what items are good for certain builds. Like, why not allow players that want to have that type of end game do it, right? Why not let them be the crafting guy who's just really good in understanding what's good for players, and then he sits there and he buys materials, he crafts stuff, he sells things, he crafts stuff, he sells. Eventually, he builds up enough capital to buy his own set of gear, and then he goes off because he's a 5-head, he gets to go have sick gear because he figured out how to play the system effectively, and then that player's going to feel really rewarded and really good about it. Like, it's again the same thing where it's like Blizzard are trying to force players to play in a certain way. And I don't see why. I think you should be able to, crafters should just have to do it. And this all comes down to like free trade and, also making it so like crafting can be free trade as well with like all the mats, everything. Now, also on crafting, depth. We haven't seen enough of the system. to really understand the depth. I don't know if they're gonna have. I don't know how they're gonna do it. If they're gonna do like maybe it's just going to be like you have X mats and then you craft a replica version of the same item every time. If that's the case, that's gonna be really sad. That's gonna be really sad. I'm hoping there's ways of just spam modifying items. You know, basically like almost gambling, like, you know, just repeatedly like reforging the same item and then trying to get like a very good variant, or like modifying it repeatedly, like metacrafting. Certain ways that people who want to go deep into crafting can, and have really not like overly complicated systems, but like systems which have depth, right? Where systems that if someone knows what they're doing, they can really get value out of it. But then also your average player can like go in there and do some basic shit like, oh, I need to get this movement speed on my boots or whatever, so he can just roll some movement speed on his boots, or like craft it onto the boots. So like, but then just have that depth there, so there can be like an absolute end game. Which honestly, you can't have too much end game. It's like anytime you can add in a system or like give depth to a system that gives people more variation in what they do, the better. So like really, I don't think they should hold back with crafting, and they should just unleash. Now let's talk talent trees and character customization. Obviously, it's really, really early on, and they did say, like, you know, like, this is early on, but we've put these in here because we want to give you an idea as to what we're planning. And overall, I feel like the trees, I mean, my chat has called them talent twigs, and you know that's not a good a good thing whenever that's happening. Now that's just they're overreacting. I think what we mean is that the trees are very linear and the choices seem very obvious. Like, oh, here's a build. Like, oh, look, you're making a choice, right? You chose A instead of B. Whereas the trees could be, you know, larger. Now, there's no point just putting in a bunch of pointless nodes that have no impact. But like I'm talking about, make them bigger and make them less linear, so you can more heavily customize your character to be like, oh, I'm fast as fuck, but I'm squishy, or oh, I'm slow, but I'm tanky, and I have like, you know what I'm saying? You could really customize the way your character plays, for example. And then also on top of that, key nodes, which completely modify the way you not only play your character, but you optimize your character. To give you an example, there's like a node in Path of Exile called Chaos Inoculation. It's a really good build-defining node. Makes your HP 1, and it means, and then chaos damage just no longer affects you, which is a crazy. You know, chaos damage is really scary, and it's very bad against you know, energy shield users. So you get that node, and then you have to completely get rid of all life on your gear. You have to optimize full ES. Just giving you an example, that's a kind of node that if you pick that node, that's going to completely modify the way you optimize your character. And if you pick that node and you have no idea what you're doing, you guys are just going to get absolutely wrecked. So this should be like, you know, you should at least have to read it, and it should be impactful, right? So I'm talking lots of nodes that completely change the way you optimize your character and gear your character, and also ways to customize your character. Overall, I don't think it needs to be some massive one, though. Like, really, the trees don't need to be much bigger. I feel like they just need to be less linear and have a lot more, you know, in terms, you should have more big game-changing key nodes. The other big kind of thing that I'm kind of really worried about is skill customization. Currently, they've got it so you can effectively just unlock all your skills. You know, you level up and you get skill points, and then as you keep going up, you eventually like be able to max out the skill. And as the skill levels up, it gets extra components. But it's not like you can customize the skill like on the bar. You can't like, you know, choose a rune. You can't do any of that. It just goes up. And they say it like the skill gets components. But really, you're looking at the skill through the lens of the final form of the skill, right? It doesn't matter. Like the game is balanced around this final version of the skill, which is going to be the max level one. So it's not like it's your shit's evolving. It's just, no, you just have to go through a process to get to the final version of your skill. Now, I think obviously they said that you're going to have to customize your skills with items and everything, but I feel like items should be like icing on the cake or extra modifiers on top of, you know, your already custom skill that you have. I've seen a few ways. There's obviously a bunch of ways different ARPGs do it. The best way and my favorite way so far that I've ever seen of skill customization It's a game called Last Epoch. You put your skill onto your bar, and as you play and kill monsters and do things, you basically gain experience and gain skill levels outside of your actual like main character's levels. Sounds confusing, but it's really not. And you can basically specialize your skill. You can make it so it like forks out. You can make it so it changes. You can make it so it changes elements. You can make it so it now turns into it revolves around you and does an aura. And it's like, they're not just like pointless things that you fill out and eventually you get the whole thing, right? No, you have to customize the skill, and you do not have enough points to max everything out, and you have to pick like A, B, C, or D, and like depending on what you're going for, like if you're going for a fire build, a coal build, or whatever kind of build, you can really heavily customize it. Do you want a coal build that like, you know, just goes full AoE, or do you want a fire build that has like pure single target? You know, for example, it's really, really, really cool way of customizing skills. Now, I'm not saying that, you know, D4 devs should just straight up rip this out. I think that it's just, you know, just being able to equip legendaries which modify skills, it's just not enough customization. And I would really love to see either a system like that where you can level skills up and like customize them, or even like just a rune like in Diablo 3, that's even still a step up. Or, you know, there's even systems where you can pick multiple runes. So it's like, you know, a game like Lost Ark, for example, has a pretty interesting way of also customizing skills where you can pick like 3 tiers. It's like tier A, B, and C. And you can pick the first tier, second tier, and third tier. So you can have a pretty custom skill. So yeah, that's my thing with the whole skills. I would really like to have, I mean, custom characters are the best. Now, on top of making your character custom, you want to give your character a kind of like identity and flavor, and the way you do that, and the way that, you know, I feel like, you know, a great example, I've been playing a lot of classic WoW recently. It costs an absolute shit ton to respec your tree, so you get known not as a paladin, you get known as a ret paladin, or a holy paladin, or an enhanced shaman, or whatever you're playing, because that's generally what you optimize and you go for. And I feel like that gets lost in something like Diablo 3, where you can just go into town and hot swap whatever the fuck you want. Like, you know, just at a whim. And that whole kind of feeling of identity, I think gets removed. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't be able to respec. I just think there should be a significant cost in which to respec. Because then you get that whole feeling, and the whole feeling of identity, like my character's unique, and this is what I am, and that's what this other guy is. How am I different from the other guy? And I feel like putting a big respec cost, or like a big penalty for changing specs, like you can only do it a certain amount of times, whatever. Maybe a resource that allows you to, like, you know, respec a point by point. I think that'd be a really, really good idea. At this point, the video is getting way, way too long. I have covered the major topics that I wanted to cover, but I have a ton more specific feedback that I want to give to the D4 devs. And God knows they're not going to want to sit here and listen to me just spurg out for like hours and hours. So I think what I'll do is we'll send this out as is, and then I'll compile and I'll try to get all the other feedback that I have and try and make it as succinct as possible, and we'll make another video. But if any of you D4 devs did make it this far, or any of the little rat boys in the YouTube chat made it this far, I appreciate it. Thanks for listening to what I had to say. I know most of it is probably cooked, and I'm just missing some piece, or I'm too low IQ to understand why something is the way it is. I'm just trying to voice my opinions and the opinions of my community as best as I can. Till next time, peace the hell out, and I'll see you later, team.